Today I'm going to show you my VS4-10 chassis build using Traxxas TRX4 axles. What's going on, everyone? Today I'm here to show you a new quick little build that I did using the new Vanquish Products VS4-10 chassis kit, as well as a set of TRX4 axles that I had. The basis of this build, of course, is the new Vanquish Products VS4-10 chassis kit. Now this kit is aimed at being able to accept either the Vanquish VS4-10 offset style axles or doing a conversion with SCX-10-2s. However, I wanted to use a set of axles that was completely different than any of that and see how they went under this. And I was pleased to find that almost all of the links from an SCX-10-2 kit will work to make this a very simple build. All four of the rear suspension links are the exact same links from an SCX-10-2 kit. The front, upper, and lower links are also the same as an SCX-10-2 kit. The tie rod on the axles is actually just the stock Traxxas tie rod. The only two links that I had to look at were the drag link and Panhard. Now the VS4-10 chassis kit comes with the drag link and Panhard, but those are not made for TRX4 axles, so I needed to do a little bit of measuring and building of a link myself. But just two simple links and I was able to put this build here together. Now I'll put in the description below the exact links that I used to build these drag link and Panhard. It'd maybe take you 10 minutes and you could have those two custom links that you needed. But let's go ahead and just step through the entire build at this point as it sits. Now this is one that I definitely am gonna go through and finish and maybe do a little bit of custom fabrication on some sort of rear cage or something along those lines, because I really like how this truck looks so far and I'm excited to take it to the end. We'll start with the exterior first. We'll kind of go from the front, work our way towards the back. Now up front for a bumper, I'm using a bumper made for an SCX-10-2 style build. It bolts to the outside of the VS4-10 chassis rails and uses the exact same holes that you would use for an aftermarket axial style bumper. I had this one here, and this one was made by UC Fab. I had it for a different build, but it worked perfectly for this one and I really like the style. On top of that bumper, I mounted a Vanquish Products 2-inch rigid light bar. I think that little light bar in the front, just a nice little touch, looks appropriate. I like that rather than a bumper mounted winch. So I think that that is a good fit to fill up that gap between the front of the bumper and the front of the grille of this Proline Power Wagon body. And speaking of Proline, the tires that I used on this one are the Predator Compound Proline 1.9 Hyrax tires. I've actually ran the smaller 4.19 inch Proline Hyraxes in the Predator Compound, but I've never ran the 475 version in that size. So I'm looking forward to that. I was happy with how those previous ones performed. I think these are gonna do just as well, or of course better, with the additional height. Inside of those tires, I filled them with some Crawler Innovations dual stage foams, and this time I also used a 4.5 inch 1/9 tuning disc on the inside of all four tires. This will help just give it a little bit extra lateral support. I think that it might help with side hilling even further than these foams already do. And the tires and foams are mounted up to a set of Vanquish Products Method MR310 bead locks, and then to mount those wheels to the axles, I'm using the set of 350 hubs. 350 refers to the offset. You can narrow or widen just by going smaller or larger on those hubs. Super simple little system. I'll link to all the products that I use in the description below just to give you guys a clear list of everything that I've got going on here. As I mentioned, I'm using the Proline Power Wagon body. Obviously it's still clear. I did remove some of the overspray film by accident, so you'll notice that. When you take this body out of the bag, it's got some very large fender flares and it's actually quite a bit taller on the sides than what you see here. I spent a lot of my time on this build just trimming and cutting the body to exactly how I wanted. Not an easy task or a quick one, but I'm really happy with the stance overall. It's nice and low. I think everything clears well. I've got a ton of clearance so that the tires are going to clear in any position through any point of the suspension flex. And for the back of the body, I went way further and I actually cut out the entire center of the bed and then just narrowed it in and then mounted it to the back of the cab. For now, that's how it sits. As I mentioned at the beginning, I am looking forward to possibly doing a little bit of cage work to this thing to mount everything, and I think what I may end up doing is hard mounting those bed sides to the cage work that I do, just to kind of separate it a little bit, maybe make it a little bit easier. I have to mount the rear portion of the cab still, so I think I'll try and kind of incorporate all of that at once. As you can see here, and as I mentioned, the entire center of this Lexan body is gone and it's just kind of open there. But the nice thing is that the VS4-10 chassis kit is pretty filled in the back here. You can see that scale fuel cell back there, looks good. The cross brace fills the chassis rails between them, so it just all looks fairly complete actually, even without anything else back there. And peeking out from the back side of the body, you can actually see a servo, and that is controlling the dig that I've also got mounted in there. But I also have one of the Vanquish radiators. This is from the Origin Body Detail set, and this is what I actually plan to use to cover up that dig servo. I haven't made a mount yet, but when I do, this radiator is going to sit right back here, and it's going to mount off of the 4 holes on the top side of this cross brace. With it back there, you won't be able to see the dig servo at all. That adds yet another scale detail. It doesn't look inappropriate, even though a radiator in the bed is not always the most efficient way of cooling, but nonetheless, I think it's still going to look good. And as far as the body fits and all, the stock sliders that come with the VS4-10 chassis set are just a generic rock slider, but they fit the length of the cab of this Power Wagon body perfectly. They actually look really appropriate, and I'm just completely satisfied with the look overall. I may do a couple little custom touches and details just to make things look a little bit better yet, but just overall, these are perfectly fitting, and I couldn't be happier with the overall appearance of them. Now, for shocks, on this chassis, I would normally use the Incision 90mm scale shocks, but on this one, I was going to run something different just for the sake of kind of mixing it up a little bit. And what I ended up using were Traxxas big bores. Now, currently, I don't have any springs on these shocks, and what most people would call this setup is a droop style suspension, meaning that you don't actually have any up travel in your shocks. You have only droop, or where the shock shaft extends out. And while this type of setup is amazing for appearance, it's not my favorite for performance. So I'm going to do something that you see more commonly on comp crawlers, and that's where I'm going to run a Losi Mini T spring on the top side of the shock, give you a coil up there to give you some better rebound, but it's not going to be the completely sprung setup that you're probably most likely used to seeing. But again, it's just something different. I really love a low slung look to a rig on portals. While portals are not necessarily the most appropriate axle in all situations, especially when you're looking at something scale, they are cool, they do offer performance benefits, but if I'm going to add that clearance there, I don't want to raise my center of gravity too much, so I want to keep the rig as low as possible, and I think we've nailed that in this situation. The axles that are underneath of this truck are basically the same as like something here under a TRX4 Sport. They're a fully locked axle setup. These were originally an axle set out of the Defender, but pulled the locking mechanism out of it and just put a spool in there just to lock everything up, keep it really simple, which is what I prefer. So next, let's pull off the body. I'm going to show you exactly what we have going on underneath. So being that we're running a Power Wagon body, I have to be kind of, cautious and make sure that I place things where I know that they will clear. That Power Wagon body can be a little trickier than a normal style body because it does pinch in the front, so you have to look at overall width of things. One thing that I did on this was I cut down the width of the battery tray that's included with the VS4-10 kit. Super simple, just an aluminum tray, so quick trip to the Dremel, I just cut a little bit off the outside, made sure it fit perfectly to the width of that cab, and now we're all set. That body is not as wide as a full 5,000 milliamp pack, which some people may like to run. Me, however, I've been running smaller and smaller packs here lately again. This is a 2200 milliamp Genzace pack, and I've also been running a lot of 1300 milliamp 4S packs from Genzace. Now, these R-line ones have been my recent favorite, and I may actually go to 4S in this one as well, just because I really do like the punch. It's a nice lightweight battery, and just in general, kind of a fan of the power. A 4S pack like this actually has decent runtime because even though it's only a 1300 milliamp pack, it's got about 20 watt hours of power, which is the overall measure of how much energy is in this pack. And a 2200 milliamp 3S has only got about 25 watt hours, so not that big of a difference between a little 1300 like this and a 2200 like that. So just something to take note of. Up front for the steering servo, I'm using a Futaba S9177 SV servo. Super powerful, super reliable. The gears in it are some of the absolute best. I've never found a servo that I have better luck with as far as gear strength and power than I do the Futabas. As far as reliability and all that goes, I don't know that there's much that can beat them. On price, there's some better options, but that's up to you. Here on the driver's side rock slider, I've got a Castle Mamba X ESC, and that is going to be driving the Holmes 3500 kV Polar Pro. These Polar Pros are super smooth, tons of power. It's a little fast on a choice for a 4S motor, but they'll be a lot of fun. It is a fantastic choice for a 3S motor though. Now that Holmes 3500 is mounted to a standard 3-gear style transmission, and this one is built out of all Vanquish and Incision parts. I've got a Vanquish motor plate and gear guard here mounted up to an orange Vanquish transmission case, and on the back side we top it all off with a dig setup. If you're not familiar with what a dig is it allows you to engage the truck in 4-wheel drive like normal, or there's a center position where it allows you to freewheel the rear tires, and finally there's a rearward most position where it actually locks the rear axle. This is super helpful for really tight turns because it kind of drags the back around, or it can be very useful for very steep climbs where you can come up to something, disengage that rear axle, let the front fight for that traction, and once it finally grabs, engage 4-wheel drive again and pull up the hill. Controlling the dig, I've got a very overkill servo. This is a Futaba BLS 152. Insanely overkill. You can get away with a 120 or 150 ounce-inch servo all day, no problem back there. I just didn't have one, and I had this one that had been sitting around, so I used it. Using a 500 ounce-inch servo for your dig is just not recommended and completely unnecessary. Controlling this whole setup, I've got a Futaba 2106 GF receiver, and this will be controlled by my Futaba 4PV radio. For the setup on the truck, of course, we've got steering in channel 1 like always. Channel 2 is the Mamba X ESC. Channel 3, I've got the auxiliary port for the Mamba X plugged into it, so I can adjust things like drag brake on the fly. I really like that feature. I put it on the dial of my 4PV, and I can just dial it down if I want to do some speed runs and not flip end over end when I'm doing something, or I can also use it for super steep descents, or I can just dial it right into where I want, so it just slowly controls its descent down a steep rock face. And then finally, in channel 4, we've got the dig servo being controlled. Later on, if I wanted to add something like a servo winch, what I would do is I would pull the auxiliary switch from that Mamba X, and I would mount the servo winch in the second position that the Vanquish VS4-10 chassis has. Inside of the transmission case, I am using a set of Incision gears. I've got a Vanquish idler gear pin in the center, and I've got an Incision slipper eliminator kit in the top. Now, being that these are TRX4 axles with portals, and those portals have gear reduction in them, gearing on this car overall is something that we're going to play with a little bit, try and find that sweet spot of where we like for speed and low end. Currently, I've got a Kimbrough 54-tooth spur gear on there and a 13-tooth Incision pinion. Now backtracking to the dig for just a second. Normally, if you're going to run a dig in a Vanquish VS4-10 chassis, either the Origin or the chassis kit, you would want to purchase the Vanquish rotated servo mount for the VS4-10. However, if you don't want to spend the extra money, you can make a very small notch in the plastic cross brace in the rear and get away with using the factory mount that comes with that dig. Simple and easy to do. If you're not adverse to just a little bit of filing or dremeling, it's an easy mod that'll save you some cash. Connecting that transmission and dig to those TRX4 axles, I've got a set of Incision machined drive shafts. Being that the pumpkin of the TRX4 axles are offset, you do want to make sure that you orient your drive shaft exactly right, using the male end on the axle side and the female end at the transmission side. Otherwise, that drive shaft can get really close to that front lower link. The VS4-10 chassis with these axles, even in a full droop style suspension like we have here, everything is just clearing really well. The rear axle tucks nicely up in behind that fuel cell where there's a little bit of a relief there for clearance of axles like this. And in the front as well, even that Panhard link, clearing everything nice right up until full stuff on these shocks. The Panhard link mount on TRX4 axles is further towards the center than a lot of trucks that we've seen. So what that means is that with the servo position and the Panhard mount, the links for the Panhard and drag link are different lengths. And that's something that you normally don't want to do. You want to try and keep those equal length as best as possible. But for this, even still, there isn't actually really any noticeable bump steer in this. I'm actually pretty happy with it. So I was concerned about that and definitely wanted to look at it while assembling it just to make sure that it wasn't exaggerated so far that it was something that I just wasn't going to be happy with. Even though there are vehicles you can buy right out of the box that have terrible bump steer, this one, complete custom setup, still works great. This is actually the first time that I've used TRX4 axles in an application where they weren't initially intended to be. You know, I've built custom TRX4 trucks, but that mainly just meant using the chassis and axles that they had, maybe changing suspension links or something like that, but it was still where they were initially intended to be. This one still looks great. Really looking to see how it performs on this setup with that much lower center of gravity of the battery position and just everything being more compact, more low, and having the ability to add the dig. I'm definitely stoked, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to help myself from going ahead and building something custom for the rear. While I'm at it, I'm sure I'll end up chopping the rear of this bed shorter. Right now it looks too, long bed-like, and I'm sure I would just constantly be clipping the backside of these Lexan fenders. So by the end of it, I will absolutely have rectified that situation. But for now, I'm really happy with how this thing turned out for just a quick one-day, throw together. And you'll have to let me know what you guys think about it as well. I'm really gonna have to think about the style that I want to do for the rear of this. On the Willys, that's a similar style as far as cab and bed. I did the full rack around the top. On this one, I think I might want to keep it lower, almost below the bed sides, but try and keep it low and a little bit more out of sight until you really get to looking. Beyond that, I won't have all that much custom metalwork to do because the front bumper was an easy bolt-on. I'm happy with how the sliders are, so I have no intention of changing those out. I'll probably want to add a simple interior into this, just something like a modified bomber interior, just to fill it up, make it look good. If you guys have other suggestions of little things you'd like to see on this thing getting finished up, let me know, because I'm definitely looking forward to getting to work on this thing soon. But with that, that's about all I have to show you guys on this new one. Again, looking forward to getting it finished. I'm excited with how it turned out, and this is actually my first Power Wagon build. Hopefully you guys saw something you liked in this video, and if you did, hit the like button. Subscribe if you're not already. Hit the notification bell so you see the videos as soon as they get uploaded. As always, I appreciate you guys for watching. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one.